Welcome to Human Physiology and your first day of class. I am Dr. Harvey and I will be your teacher for this semester. And you can contact me through Canvas. You can contact me either through my VVC email or you can contact me at this extension. And physiology basically is the study of the function of plants and animals in their normal state. So you've taken anatomy already, and what you studied in anatomy was all about form. Physiology is all about function. How do things work? How does the human body work? And that's what we are going to discuss in this class because this is all about human physiology. Now you can see the picture below. This is how we're going to go through the physiology class. So physiology really is a lot about chemistry. Now, don't groan. I know how most of you feel about chemistry, and I get it. Usually if you have a biology, physiology brain, you don't really have a chemistry brain. Some of you will be lucky to have a brain that really clicks with both, but most of us, including myself, aren't really chemistry brains, okay? I do have a degree in chemistry, but it's not my most fun subject. But to understand physiology correctly, we do have to review some chemistry. And so we're going to really start with that. And we're going to go over atoms. And again, this is going to be a quick review for you just to kind of refresh your memory. We'll talk about molecules and then we'll move into the cell. Now, the cell is all about chemistry. So we're going to use some of that chemistry to describe what's going on with the cell and then to talk a little bit about tissues. And then we're really going to jump into the organs. And we're going to talk about organ systems and how all of those systems work together to make a functioning human being, because of course that's what this is all about, and that is what is very important. Now, we're going to try to make this class interesting, and so we're going to talk about what we call teleology, and we're also going to talk about mechanisms. So teleologically speaking, it's all about why do things exist? Why do things happen? And mechanistically speaking, it's all about what's the purpose of this? How does it actually work? How does it function? What are the processes involved? So we're going to try to talk a little bit about both. It does make it a bit more interesting that way. And so for instance, okay, so we're going to talk about how do you breathe? But then, why do you breathe? Why do you even need to breathe? And you think, oh, well, that, of course, is just easy. But really, is it? Because, for instance, I have a very good friend who works for NASA. And one of the things that he's been working on for a number of years is to try to figure out a process whereby humans don't have to breathe. And wouldn't that be important to not have to breathe, or maybe not even have to breathe so much if you're living on Mars? Or let's just bring it back down to Earth. What if you have somebody who, let's say, has a heart attack at home and they stop breathing? Is there something you could do to keep that person alive while they're not breathing, not have to really worry so much about CPR, and can I get them breathing again before you actually get them into the emergency room? And the answer is my friend has actually developed an artificial blood. And this artificial blood has some chemicals in it that allows you to put a lot of oxygen into this blood so that while the person is not breathing, they don't actually have to breathe. So if I can infuse them with this artificial blood while I transport them from their home to the hospital, I can keep them alive with this oxygen from the blood, and they don't even have to breathe. So we're going to talk about all of that as we go along. And of course, how does our blood flow? How do red blood cells transport oxygen? And are all of these actually that important anymore with all the new chemistry that's coming out? So why does your blood flow? Why do you have to have this oxygen? What's going on with all of this? We're going to try to talk about all these different things through the various different organ systems to try to make all of this interesting and, of course, make sense to us. But I want you to know that one of the major concepts in biology, physiology, doesn't matter what it is homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is all about the balance of the body. So you want to make sure your body is able to stay in balance, to stay consistent, and to not go too far out of balance. Now, of course, every day, all day, our body goes out of balance. So for instance, I'm sitting here right now talking to you, and I have a particular blood pressure as I'm talking to you sitting down. But if I were to stand up or if I were to lay down, my blood pressure changes. And that blood pressure change is taking me out of homeostasis. But is that necessarily a bad thing? And the answer to that is no, because you can go out of homeostasis for a short period of time, and our body has multiple different mechanisms that help bring us back into that homeostasis. And for instance, one of your essays, which is going to be in exam 3, is to explain the process of how we maintain that blood pressure when outside forces are trying to take us out of homeostasis. So for instance, I'm going to give you a scenario where a person is bleeding internally and their blood pressure is falling because of that. What's that person's body doing? Trying to keep the blood pressure at a normal level. Because if the blood pressure falls too much, we're not going to survive. We're going to die from this. So we're going to talk about homeostasis a lot in this class, and we're going to discuss how homeostasis affects the various different systems of our body. Now, one of the ways that our body regulates homeostasis is through a process called negative feedback. Now, don't get too freaked out. We're going to talk about negative feedback. It's a pretty intense concept, and I don't necessarily expect you to get negative feedback right away. And we're going to talk about it a bunch in all of our lectures as we go through. But negative feedback is the ability of the body to survive when something changes. And that means either an internal change or it could even be a change in the environment. And so when those changes occur, like I'm standing up, I'm laying down, I'm bleeding internally, our body is going to do something to try to keep the internal environment somewhat stable. Bring it back to what it should be before that change occurred. So negative feedback is kind of similar to your thermostat at home. Okay, so today for me, it's a pretty cold day. The wind is blowing. There's snow on the mountains. And so I have set my thermostat so that the heat comes on. Okay, so right now my thermostat is set at 65 degrees. But it doesn't stay perfectly 65 degrees in my house, right? I mean, that's just the way it is. So how the thermostat works is if the temperature in the house falls below 65 degrees, let's say it falls to 64 degrees, then my thermostat is going to click on and the heat is going to start pumping. And what that'll do is that'll make the temperature go up. And when the thermostat hits 65 degrees, my heater turns off. And then because the heater is off, the temperature is going to fall. And again, let's say it falls to 64 degrees, the heater turns back on, brings the heat back up to 65 degrees. That is negative feedback. So the change in the environment, that falling to 64 degrees, signals my thermostat to bring the temperature back to 65. So with our body, let's say I have a certain hormone, and that hormone is supposed to stay at this level, whatever the heck that level is. But things happen. The hormone gets used up, whatever, and the level of that hormone starts to drop. As soon as it drops, my body goes, oh shoot, that's too low. Let's make more hormone and we're going to pump it up to the normal level it's supposed to be at. So as soon as it gets back to that normal level, the body stops making it. And then eventually we're going to use it up and it's going to fall down to a lower level. The body will click back on and bring the hormone level back up. You see the similarity between my heater, my thermostat, and making hormones in our body? It's really the same thing. That is the process of negative feedback. So basically in negative feedback, something goes down lower than it's supposed to be, no problem. The body does whatever it needs to do to bring it back up to the level it's supposed to be. So that's where the word negative comes from. Something's going down in the body, but the body brings it back up to the normal level. So the down part is the negative part. So let's just skip that. And this is the same thing I was just telling you with the hormones. So for instance, one of those hormones might be the thyroid hormone. So if the thyroid hormone goes down because we've used it up, the brain is responsible for telling the body, hey, look, we need to make more of this, and those levels are brought back up. We're going to go through this whole process with the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary, and the thyroid in a future lecture when we talk about the endocrine system. So you'll see. But I just wanted to basically tell you that the thyroid hormone is an example of a hormone that's levels can go down, and then we can bring those levels back up through that negative feedback process. So you can watch this YouTube video, and it just tells you a little bit more about the thyroid hormones. Now there is another type of feedback, and this is called positive feedback. Now positive feedback is different. This is not helping with homeostasis. As a matter of fact, positive feedback helps to throw us out of homeostasis. It doesn't allow us to stay in that balance. It takes us out of balance. Now, positive feedback can be very important. It's not to say positive feedback is necessarily bad as long as it's working well. So I'll give you an example. So let's say that I accidentally cut myself and now I'm bleeding. Now, of course, no kidding, I don't want to keep bleeding forever and ever. I want that bleeding to stop. So one of the things that is floating around in our blood are these little things called platelets. And platelets are really, really sticky. And so as the blood, let's say I have a cut on my arm, right? And as the blood is coming out of my arm, platelets are flowing towards the surface. And what they're going to do is they're going to stick to the edges of that cut. And so you can see right here, for instance, in this picture, you can see these little platelets here. And this is where the cut was. And you can see the platelets are all sticking to the edge of the cut. Now, what the platelets are going to do is they're going to form something we call a platelet plug. They're going to plug up that cut. So in order for them to do that, you need a lot of platelets. You can't just have a few. You have to have a ton of platelets to come in and plug up that cut. So the platelets, once they stick to the edges of the cut, they actually secrete a chemical that attracts more platelets. And more platelets stick to the edge of the cut. And then those secrete a chemical that attract more platelets. And they stick and they secrete a chemical that attracts more platelets. And more platelets stick. And they secrete a chemical that attracts more platelets. And more platelets stick and they secrete a chemical that attracts more platelets. And you get the idea. You get a ton of platelets sticking and forming this plug, mushy mess all over where the crack or the cut is, and it is plugging it all up so I don't continue to bleed until eventually my body can heal whatever that cut is. So the fact that some platelets came in and stuck, and then they secreted a chemical that attracted more platelets, and then those platelets secreted a chemical that attracted more platelets. And those chemicals were secreted that attracted more platelets and more platelets and more platelets. And you get the idea. That's why we call it a positive feedback. Because A stimulated B, B stimulated A again, and that stimulated B, which stimulated A again, and it just keeps going up and up and up. Now the only thing is, once you get so many platelets sticking, you need it to stop. There has to be what I like to call a shut-off switch, or you have an issue. I mean, imagine this for a second. What happens if platelets just keep sticking and sticking and sticking and sticking, and they never stop sticking? I have sticky platelets all throughout my body. I start getting clots everywhere, and this is not good. This is what we call pathological. It's not a good thing. I'm sick now. So anytime I have a positive feedback, something is going up and up and up and up and up and up in my body, but I have to have a shut-off switch. Whereas with negative feedback, something goes down, but I have to bring it back up to normal. Hopefully you get that information and that kind of sort of makes sense to you. But again, remember, we're going to talk about both negative and positive feedback a lot in this class as we go along.